They really thought they could get away with building 122 homes on my hill. 122. The HOA president just smirked, waving a stack of papers in my face while bulldozers tore up the land my family has owned for generations. She called me an obstacle. She thought I was just some old man who would give up. So I played along. I watched them pour the foundations, raise the walls, and finish every last roof. But they had no idea my quiet patience was part of a revenge plan, all thanks to one little detail they missed in the county records. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because you are about to see a bully HOA get exactly what it deserves. And if you believe homeowners deserve to win against this kind of abuse, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss the moment their entire project comes crashing down. The old truck rattled up the gravel access road, the one I'd carved into the hillside myself 30 years ago. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of quiet blue sky day that always reminded me why I never left this place. My plan was simple. Check on the sprinkler system for the garden, maybe sit on the ridge for a bit, and just breathe. Up here, the world went quiet. It was the only place left that did. I'd spent my career as an engineer in noisy plants and chaotic construction sites, and this hill was my reward. It was my sanctuary. It was the place I'd taught my daughter, Emily, how to find the Big Dipper, the same spot where my wife and I had our anniversary picnics. Every rock and tree held a memory. I rounded the final bend, expecting to see the familiar silhouette of the old oak tree against the sky. Instead, I saw a sea of fluorescent orange vests and the glint of sun off a surveyor's tripod. My foot hit the brakes so hard the truck shuddered to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust. A handful of men were driving stakes into the ground, running bright yellow tape across the meadow where Emily used to fly kites. Beyond them, near the ridge, was the low growl of an engine. A small bulldozer sat there, its blade already having scraped a raw, brown patch into the green landscape. A cold knot formed in my gut. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of survey for the county, maybe. They must have taken a wrong turn. I put the truck in park and got out, my worn work boots crunching on the gravel. I walked toward the nearest man, a kid who couldn't have been older than 25, holding a clipboard. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I think you guys might be on the wrong property. This is all private land." He glanced up, his expression blank, and pointed over his shoulder with his thumb. "You need to talk to her," he mumbled, then went back to his notes. I followed his gesture and saw her, Karen Whitmore. She was standing by a white SUV, clipboard in hand, looking like a general surveying a battlefield. She was the new HOA president for the subdivision down at the bottom of my hill, a community I wasn't even part of. We'd met once, briefly, when she'd left a passive-aggressive note on my mailbox about the length of the grass near the road. I walked over, my mind racing. "Karen," I started, still aiming for polite. "There's a mistake. Your crew is on my property." She gave me a slow, condescending smile. The kind that's meant to tell you you're a simpleton. "Jack, isn't it? No mistake at all. We're just marking out the grid for the new development phase. It's all approved." I felt a surge of disbelief. Development? What development? This is my hill. I have the deed, the survey maps. My grandfather bought this land in 1958. I could already feel the blood pounding in my ears. The place where the bulldozer sat, that's where I'd planned to build a small cabin for my grandkids one day. Karen let out a little sigh, a theatrical puff of air that was pure performance. "Yes, we're all aware of your family history here, but times change. The community needs to grow. The board approved the expansion plan for 122 new homes. It's going to do wonders for property values." She tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured finger. 122 homes. The number was so absurd, it barely registered. They weren't just trespassing. They were planning an invasion. "You can't just decide to build on my land," I said, my voice getting tighter. "I don't care what your board approved. This property line is decades old and clearly marked. I still thought I could reason with her. I'm an engineer. I believe in measurements, in documents, in facts. I figured if I just showed her my paperwork, this whole ridiculous misunderstanding would be over. I pulled my wallet out, ready to show her my ID, ready to go back to my truck and get the deed. She just shook her head, that smirk never leaving her face. Your paperwork is, sadly, out of date. The HOA's legal team found several unrecorded easements from when the county was planning a highway bypass in the 70s. It was never built, but the easements are still on the books. They give us access and development rights. It's all perfectly legal. I stared at her. An unrecorded easement? It sounded like complete nonsense. A bureaucratic ghost story cooked up to steal land. I've lived here for 40 years. I've paid taxes on every square inch of this hill. No one has ever mentioned an easement. This is where the shift happened. The moment the polite, neighborly part of me died and something colder took its place. She laughed. It wasn't a little chuckle. It was a full, dismissive laugh, as if I'd just told a childish joke. "Oh, Jack," she said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "You can't just sit on a piece of prime real estate forever and expect progress to wait for you. The community has rights too." That word again, community. She used it like a weapon. Behind her, I could see the men hammering another stake into the ground right where Emily had her wedding photos taken. The rage that hit me was white hot, but it was quiet. I learned in the service that the loudest man in the room is usually the weakest. I just stood there, letting her words sink in. She saw my silence as a victory. "Look," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard. "We can make this easy, or we can make this hard. Any attempt to interfere with the construction will result in fines, significant fines. We'll put a lien on your property so fast your head will spin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a schedule to keep." She turned her back on me, a clear dismissal, and started barking orders at the surveyor. The conversation was over. I was a bug she'd just flicked off her sleeve. I stood there for another minute, the sound of the bulldozer's engine a dull roar in my ears, the smell of diesel fumes mixed with the scent of freshly turned earth. My earth. Helplessness is a poison. It seeps into your bones and tells you you've already lost. I felt it then, the gut punch of watching a bully with a clipboard and a team of lawyers steamroll you with rules you never knew existed. But as I walked back to my old truck, that helplessness started to burn off, leaving something else in its place. It was a cold, hard resolve. She thought she'd won. She thought I was just some grumpy old man she could push aside. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know what I was capable of. They could start building their houses. They could pour their concrete and hammer their nails. But I wouldn't be watching my hill die. I'd be watching them. And I'd be waiting. The new reality began at 5:30 the next Monday morning. A deep, earth-shaking rumble woke me from a restless sleep. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of heavy machinery, a whole fleet of it, crawling up my access road. I got out of bed and looked out the window. A parade of dump trucks and cement mixers, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom, was lining up at the base of the hill. The invasion had started for real. The speed was shocking. Within a week, the gentle slope of the meadow was gone, replaced by a terraced, muddy wasteland. The noise was constant, the roar of engines, the high-pitched shriek of backup alarms, the thud of heavy equipment hitting rock. Dust coated everything. My windows, my truck, the leaves on the ancient oak they'd thankfully left standing. But they were careless. One afternoon, a flatbed truck delivering lumber took the turn onto the main road too wide and flattened a section of the split-rail fence that marked my actual, undisputed property line. I watched from the porch as the driver just shrugged and drove on. I went out with my tools to fix it myself. My neighbor, Frank Donovan, a retired firefighter who lived just down the road, saw me and came over to help. Frank's a good man, solid as a rock, but he had a haunted look in his eyes. He'd lost a house 20 years ago in a different state because of a dispute with an HOA that bled him dry with legal fees. "You gotta be careful, Jack," he said, his voice low, as we set a new fence post. He kept glancing over his shoulder toward the construction site. Karen's got the whole board wrapped around her finger. She's making examples of people. He told me the Miller family, 2 houses down, got a violation notice and a $200 fine because their trash can was visible from the street an hour after pickup. The letter cited a rule that had never been enforced before. People were scared. You could feel it. The friendly waves between neighbors became quick nods. The weekend barbecues stopped. Karen was using fear to isolate us, turning a neighborhood into a collection of anxious strangers. That fence was the last time I tried to reason with anyone. I walked up to the site foreman, a big guy with a sunburned neck, and calmly explained his driver had damaged my property. He just grunted, didn't even make eye contact. "Talk to the HOA," he said, spitting on the ground. "We just work here." It was clear. Logic was useless. Talking was a waste of breath. The quiet fury that had been simmering inside me cooled into something else entirely. It became a plan. That night, I went down to my basement workshop, my old engineering office. I cleared off my drafting table, pushing aside plans for a birdhouse I was building for Emily. I unrolled a large topographical map of the hill, my own survey, done years ago. Then I started gathering the paperwork. Every tax record, the original deed, plat maps from the county website, printouts of the HOA's bylaws that Frank had secretly slipped into my mailbox. I pinned them to a large corkboard on the wall, connecting them with colored yarn like a detective in an old movie. Red for HOA claims, blue for my property lines, yellow for questions. I worked methodically, like I was designing a bridge. You don't rush a bridge. You check every calculation, every load-bearing point, every stress fracture. The HOA was a badly designed structure, and I was going to find its weak point. I started quietly talking to a few more neighbors, planting seeds. I'd catch old Mr. Henderson while he was getting his mail and ask, "Did you ever see a soil stability report for that hillside? Seems steep for that many foundations." I'd mention to another, "That contractor they hired has a few complaints against them over in the next county. Shoddy concrete work." I wasn't asking them to join a fight. I was just giving them facts, engineering concerns that would make any homeowner nervous. I was laying a foundation of doubt, brick by brick. They were still too scared to speak up, but I could see the gears turning in their heads. They started watching the construction a little more closely. 2 weeks into the project, I decided to go after Karen's claim about the unrecorded easements. An easement that lets you build an entire subdivision sounded too convenient, too perfect. Something that significant should leave a big paper trail. My daughter Emily did some digging online, but we hit a wall. The digital records only went back to the 1980s. To find something from the 70s, I had to go to the source, the County Registry of Deeds. It was a sterile, quiet building downtown that smelled like old paper and floor wax. I went late on a Friday afternoon, hoping it would be empty. I spent hours scrolling through microfilm, my eyes burning from the greenish glow of the reader. I found nothing. No highway bypass plans. No easements matching the plot numbers Karen had cited. I felt a pang of despair. Maybe she was right. Maybe her lawyers really had found some obscure loophole that screwed me, but I wasn't ready to give up. I asked the clerk, a helpful woman named Maria Chen, if there were any other records, older ledgers maybe. She pointed me toward a back room, a dusty archive filled with massive, leather-bound books. "This is the old stuff," she said, before everything was indexed properly. "Good luck." For 3 hours, I carefully turned brittle, yellowed pages. My fingers were gray with dust. I felt like I was searching for a ghost. And then I found it. It wasn't in the main ledger under my property's parcel number. It was in a secondary transfer log, a book of miscellaneous filings from 1974. There it was, a reference to a potential county right-of-way filed as part of a preliminary infrastructure plan. But the plan was officially abandoned and nullified a year later. In 1975, the right-of-way was never granted. It never legally existed. The crucial part was how it was recorded, or rather, how it wasn't. The nullification was filed, but the original inquiry was never officially expunged from the miscellaneous log. Karen's lawyers hadn't found a secret easement. They'd found a ghost, a typo in the history books. They'd built their entire legal argument on a 40-year-old clerical error, a plan that was dead on arrival. They were trespassers, every one of them. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. The feeling wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was the cold, satisfying click of a puzzle piece locking into place. I took a photo of the page with my phone, the image of that forgotten, nullified entry glowing on the screen. It was my weapon. As I walked out of that dusty room and into the evening air, the roar of the construction trucks in the distance sounded different. It was no longer the sound of defeat. It was the sound of a clock ticking down. I won't watch my hill die. I'll be the one to save it. I knew holding onto the proof from the registry of deeds was like holding a lit stick of dynamite. The fuse was long, but my timing had to be perfect. If I moved too soon, they'd just bury me in legal motions and tie me up for years. Karen's lawyers were sloppy, but they were expensive, and I couldn't afford a long, drawn-out fight. So I waited, and I watched. And Karen, feeling confident, decided to turn up the heat. The first official shot wasn't aimed at me, but at Frank. A bright orange violation sign was staked into his lawn one morning, right next to his prize-winning rose bushes. The charge? Unapproved shrubbery height. Those roses had been there for 30 years. Frank took the sign down, and 2 days later, he got a certified letter with a $300 fine. It was a message, and everyone in the neighborhood understood it perfectly. If you're friends with Jack McAllister, you're a target. The change was almost immediate. People I'd known for decades, people whose kids had played with Emily in my yard, started avoiding me. When I'd drive down the street, I'd see neighbors who were outside suddenly find a reason to go back into their house. The Hendersons, a lovely couple in their 70s, were out gardening one afternoon. I gave them a wave. Mrs. Henderson saw me, and I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. She nudged her husband, and they both turned their backs, suddenly fascinated by a stubborn weed. The loneliness was a physical weight. It was worse than the noise and the dust. Karen wasn't just stealing my land. She was methodically stripping me of my community, cutting me off from the people who had been the bedrock of my life for half a century. I'd never felt so isolated, even in the service. Out there, you knew who the enemy was. Here, the enemy wore a pastel polo shirt and turned your friends against you with a clipboard. But despair is a luxury I couldn't afford, so I channeled my frustration into work. I treated the construction site like a professional engineering audit. Every morning, I'd be up before the crews arrived, my binoculars and a high-zoom camera in hand. From my porch, I had a perfect vantage point. I started a new logbook, 7:14 a.m., concrete truck arriving from Apex Concrete. Slump looks too wet, likely won't pass a strength test. Took photo, 10:32 a.m., crew installing rebar for the retaining wall on Lot 3. Spacing is 12 inches, but the approved plans specify 8-inch spacing for a grade of this severity. Took video, 2 p.m., backfill being dumped against the foundation of Lot 5. Soil is mostly clay, not the specified granular fill. That foundation will heave in the first winter frost. My logbook filled up with dozens of these small, critical errors. Each one was a tiny victory that no one else could see. I filed a few informal complaints with the county building inspector's office. Just simple, one-page reports with a photo attached. I knew they wouldn't stop construction. A busy county inspector wasn't going to shut down a 100-home development over a rebar spacing issue, but each complaint created a public record. It was another pin in my corkboard, another piece of ammunition I was storing up. I was building a case that this wasn't just a simple property dispute. It was a project defined by negligence and incompetence, run by bullies. The real shift in my strategy came one evening when Emily came over for dinner. She was trying to cheer me up, but she could see the strain. "Dad, even if you prove they're trespassing, what happens?" she asked, stirring her iced tea. They'll just sue you, and the developer will back them. It's their money on the line, not just the HOA's. She was right. I was so focused on Karen, on the legal error of the easement, that I'd been thinking too small. Karen was just the front woman. The real power behind this whole mess was the developer, a slick-looking guy named Tom Hensley, whose smiling face was on billboards all over the county. His company, Hensley Homes, was the one with the deep pockets. The HOA was just giving him the land to do it. That night, after Emily left, I went back down to my workshop. I pushed aside the construction logbook and my property deeds. It was time to follow the money. I started researching Hensley Homes. The company was a typical suburban developer, churning out cookie-cutter houses as fast as they could. But I also found a string of lawsuits from other communities, complaints about shoddy work, drainage problems, and cracked foundations, all the things I was documenting in my logbook. Then I dug into the partnership agreement between the HOA and Hensley Homes, which was a public record filed with the county. I spent hours reading through the dense legal language, my engineering brain slowly piecing together the financial structure, and that's when I saw it. Hensley wasn't just building on the land. He had a series of phased purchase options tied to the HOA's successful acquisition of the plots. He hadn't bought it all outright. The agreement was structured to minimize his risk. The HOA had to deliver him legally sound, ready-to-build lots in phases. If they failed to deliver any phase, he had the option to pull his funding for the subsequent phases with minimal penalty. It was a standard developer's safety clause. But my hill, the contested land, wasn't just one phase. It was broken up into 3 separate phases of development. And the first plots they were building on, the ones covered by the fake easement from 1974, were the linchpin for the entire financial deal. If the HOA couldn't legally deliver those first lots, the whole domino chain of financing could collapse. Tom Hensley, the man with the real money, would have a legal right to walk away. Suddenly, my fight wasn't just against Karen's petty tyranny anymore. It was about leveraging the financial fear of a multi-million-dollar developer. The discovery felt like a jolt of electricity. The isolation, the fines, the neighbors turning away, it all faded into the background. I was no longer just a victim defending his property. I was an engineer who had just found the critical stress fracture in the enemy's bridge, and I was about to put all my weight on it. The first real crack in my resolve came on a Tuesday. The calendar on my kitchen wall had a big red circle around the date. Emily's wedding was just a month away. For as long as she could remember, she'd wanted to have a quiet brunch with her mother's side of the family at our house the day before the ceremony. It was a tradition, a moment of peace and reflection in the garden my wife had planted, overlooking the hill. It was meant to be the calm before the joyful storm. Emily called me, and I could hear the strain in her voice from the first word. "Dad," she said, her voice small. "We can't do the brunch here. I drove by today, and it's impossible." I knew what she meant. The construction wasn't just noise anymore. It was a physical assault. The ground vibrated from the heavy rollers compacting the new roads. The air was thick with the constant thwack, thwack, thwack of nail guns and the grating screech of metal saws. A peaceful garden brunch would be a joke. It would be like trying to have a picnic in the middle of a war zone. "It's okay, honey," I told her, my own voice sounding hollow. "We'll figure something else out." After we hung up, I sank into my chair at the kitchen table. The weight of it all came crashing down on me. I wasn't just an old engineer fighting a bureaucratic battle anymore. I was a father whose fight was now spoiling one of the most important days of his daughter's life. The logbooks, the deed research, the photographs of shoddy rebar, it all felt small and pointless. What good was winning back a hill if my family couldn't even enjoy the home at the bottom of it? For the first time, I felt a deep, gnawing wave of defeat. The isolation had worn me down, but this was different. This was guilt. I got up, walked over to my laptop, and did something I never thought I would. I opened a real estate website and typed in my address. The estimated value that popped up was staggering. With the new development going in, the land was worth a fortune. I could sell, I could take the money, buy a quiet piece of property somewhere else, and help Emily and her new husband with a down payment on a house of their own. I could just walk away. Let Karen have her ugly little empire of vinyl siding. For a few hours, the idea was a relief. It was an escape hatch from the constant stress, the sleepless nights, the looks from my neighbors. Maybe this was the smart move. Maybe fighting was just an old man's pride. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The idea of selling felt like acid in my stomach. Giving up would mean Karen won. It would mean the memories on that hill were worth less than a developer's check. At 2 a.m., I found myself back in the workshop, staring at the corkboard. I couldn't look at the map of my own property anymore. It was too painful. Instead, I pulled up the county's digital plat maps, focusing on the entire HOA development. I started cross-referencing the lot numbers from Hensley's contract with the official ownership records on the county server. It was just busy work, something to occupy my mind. But then, I saw something odd. It was a small cluster of 4 lots on the far western edge of the development, right where they'd set up their main staging area for equipment and materials. According to Hensley's development plan, these lots were part of the HOA's holdings, but according to the county's official digital deed records, they weren't. The ownership was still listed under the name of the original farmer who had sold off the land to create the subdivision 30 years ago. He'd passed away a decade back. I dug deeper. It was another clerical error, but a different kind. The deeds for these 4 lots had been part of the sale, but the final transfer documents were either misfiled or never completed. The HOA had been acting like they owned them, paying taxes on them, and now using them as the logistical hub for their entire project. But on paper, where it legally mattered, they were trespassing. This discovery didn't feel like a win. Not yet. It was just a small, interesting fact, a loose thread in their neatly woven story of legal authority. It was a spark, but I was still in the dark. The final push came the next morning. Frank sent me a text with a screenshot. "You need to see this," it said. It was from the official neighborhood Facebook group. A newer resident had posted a mild complaint about the construction crew starting work before 7 a.m. on a Saturday. Karen's reply was right below it. She started with her usual corporate speak about progress and temporary inconvenience. Then, she took a direct shot at me. "Frankly," she wrote, "for everyone to see, our project is facing unnecessary delays due to the selfish actions of a single disgruntled individual who refuses to see the bigger picture. We have one grumpy old man who would rather cling to the past than allow this community and your property values to flourish. His constant complaints are a drain on the board's resources, and we appreciate your patience as we deal with him legally." The post was a public execution. It was designed to paint me as the villain, the crazy old coot holding up progress for everyone. The comments started to roll in immediately. "Tell him, Karen," one person wrote. "Some people are just so entitled," said another. Her sycophants were out in force. I was being publicly ridiculed, my name dragged through the mud in front of the entire community. The humiliation was a hot flash of shame and anger. The thought of selling evaporated. Any consideration I had for walking away was burned to ash. She had made it personal. She had attacked my character. My daughter's wedding was disrupted. My neighbors were turned against me, and now I was being publicly slandered as a selfish old man. This was never just about a hill. It was about respect. It was about a bully who thought rules and public shaming gave her unlimited power. I looked from the glowing screen of my phone at the hateful comments, then back to the map on my wall, with the 4 misfiled lots glowing like beacons. The spark I'd found in the county records now had fuel. A cold, clear purpose settled over me. Karen had escalated this from a property dispute to a war on my name, and I was going to finish it. The Facebook post was a gift. Karen, in her arrogance, had given me exactly what I needed, a public stage. The next HOA board meeting was in 10 days, held in the community clubhouse. Normally, Only a handful of residents bothered to show up. But her post had stirred the pot. People were talking. This time, I knew the room would be full. I had 10 days to turn my collection of facts and grievances into an airtight case. A story so simple and compelling that no one could ignore it. The first person I called was Art Pendleton, an old friend from my Army days who became a lawyer. Art wasn't a fancy corporate attorney. He was a crusty, no-nonsense guy who specialized in property law. I drove to his office with a box of files. For 3 hours, I laid it all out. My deed, the fake easement from the dusty county ledger, the 4 misfiled lots, my logbook of construction violations, and a printout of Karen's Facebook post. Art listened, nodding slowly, peering at the documents through his reading glasses. He didn't say much, but when I finished, he leaned back in his creaky leather chair. "Jack," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "She didn't just step in a hole. She built the hole, jumped in, and then pulled the dirt in on top of herself." Art's job was to handle the legal filings, quietly and quickly. My job was to prepare for the meeting. The slow, patient work of gathering evidence was over. Now, it was about presentation. I went back to my workshop and started building what I called my proof board. It was a large, 4 by 8 foot sheet of plywood. I wasn't going to show up with a stack of confusing papers. I was going to show them pictures. An engineer learns to make complex things simple. My first step was to create a visual timeline of the land. On one side, I printed a huge, color-coded map of the entire area. I used a thick black marker to draw the original, undisputed property lines. Then, with a bright red marker, I drew the line the HOA was claiming, showing the massive overlap onto my hill. The visual was shocking. You didn't need to be a surveyor to see it was a land grab. Next, I took my photos of the construction errors, the badly spaced rebar, the wrong backfill, the cracked concrete from the samples I'd discreetly taken, and blew them up into large 8 by 10 prints. I mounted each one and wrote a simple, clear caption underneath. Unsafe retaining wall, Lot 3, and foundation at risk, Lot 5. This wasn't about property lines anymore. This was about the safety of the very homes they were building. The centerpiece of my board was the deed issue. I printed a certified copy of the page from the old county ledger showing the nullified easement, and a bright, clear screenshot of the county website showing the 4 lots still legally belonging to the deceased farmer. I drew big red arrows pointing to the key details. There was no legalese, no jargon. It was just proof, plain and simple. While I was building my case, Art was making his move. He tracked down the descendants of the old farmer whose name was still on the deeds for those 4 lots. It was a grandson, a young guy living 2 states away who had no idea he was technically a landowner here. Art explained the situation, and the grandson was more than happy to sign over a quitclaim deed to me for a token amount. It was all filed electronically and quietly with the county clerk. Just like that, I became the legal owner of the 4 lots the HOA was using as their construction headquarters. They were trespassing, and now they were trespassing on my land. The final piece was the community. I couldn't walk into that meeting alone. I needed my neighbors. I took a few key photographs from my proof board, the one showing the unsafe retaining wall looming over the houses below, and another showing where their new drainage plan was set to flood an existing street, and went to see Frank. He took one look at them, and his face hardened. "It's worse than I thought," he said. He took the pictures and went to see a few other old-timers in the neighborhood, the ones who had been there long enough to be respected. The fear Karen had cultivated was still there, but Frank was a firefighter. People trusted him. He didn't ask them to speak up or sign anything. He just showed them the pictures. He showed them the physical danger Karen's sloppy, arrogant project was putting them in. A retired plumber saw the drainage plan and immediately recognized it would back up the entire storm sewer system. A woman who had a retaining wall fail on a previous property knew exactly what she was looking at in the photo of Lot 3. The seed of doubt I'd planted was finally starting to grow. The night before the meeting, I stood in my workshop and looked at my finished proof board. It was all there. Every lie, every shortcut, every piece of bureaucratic bullying, laid out in simple pictures and plain language. I thought about the first day, standing on the hill, feeling that helpless rage. I thought about the isolation, the loneliness. And now, I felt a calm, steady current of confidence. Karen thought she was in a fight with a grumpy old man. She had no idea she was walking into a meticulously engineered trap. She was so focused on her social media power plays and her clipboard authority that she never bothered to check the foundation of her own project. And I had the blueprints to prove it was all about to come crashing down. I felt the slow thrill of knowing what was coming, the quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. The next night, the show would begin. Frank and I arrived at the clubhouse 15 minutes early. He helped me carry in the proof board, which I'd covered with a plain gray moving blanket. The room was already buzzing. It was standing room only, packed with more people than I'd ever seen at one of these things. Some were live streaming on their phones. Karen's Facebook post had backfired beautifully. She thought she was isolating me, but she just handed me a bigger audience. I saw Frank give a quiet nod to a few familiar faces in the crowd. The seeds he'd planted were here. We propped the covered board against the wall at the front of the room, and I took a seat in the first row, right in the center. I wanted Karen to see my face. She and the other 4 board members sat at a long table, looking self-important. Karen beamed, clearly thrilled with the turnout. She probably thought everyone was there to support her. The developer, Tom Hensley, was there too, sitting off to the side, looking smooth and confident in an expensive suit. Karen opened the meeting with her usual mix of condescending pleasantries and vague announcements. Then she got to the main event. As many of you know, she began, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity, we've had some minor challenges with the new development. One individual has raised some concerns. She glanced at me, a flicker of a smirk on her lips. But I want to assure everyone that our legal team has confirmed the HOA is on completely solid ground. She was about to move on to the next agenda item, but I stood up. Madam President, I said, my voice calm but loud enough to fill the room. I believe the community deserves to see the full picture. A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's smile tightened. Mr. McAllister, this is not the forum for your personal grievances. If you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing. My grievance is a community grievance, I replied, walking over to my board. It's about property, it's about safety, and it's about the truth. I pulled the blanket off the board with a flourish. There was a collective gasp from the audience. The huge, color-coded map, the photos of the shoddy construction, the blown-up legal documents. It was a visual punch to the gut. I picked up a wooden pointer from the side of the stage. Let's start with the basics, I said, turning to the room, not to Karen. This black line is my property. It's been my property for over 60 years. This red line is what the HOA is claiming. As you can see, they're claiming to own nearly a third of my hill. I then pointed to the first document. They based this claim on something called an easement from 1974. Here is the official county record of that easement. I tapped the first page. And here, I said, tapping the second, is the official county record from 1975, showing that the plan was abandoned and the easement was nullified. It never legally existed. The HOA is trespassing, and has been from day one. The room erupted in whispers. Karen's face went from smug to pale in a heartbeat. That's not accurate, she stammered. Our lawyers, I didn't let her finish. I moved the pointer to the next section of the board. Even if you ignore the trespassing, let's talk about safety. I tapped the photo of the improperly spaced rebar. This is the inside of the retaining wall on Lot 3, just above the miller's backyard. The plans called for 8-inch spacing. This is 12-inch spacing. As an engineer, I can tell you this wall will fail. It's not a question of if, but when. Mrs. Miller let out a small, terrified cry. I continued, pointing to picture after picture, my voice steady and factual. explaining each defect in plain, simple terms. With every photo, the mood in the room shifted. The whispers turned to angry murmurs. People were turning to look at Karen, their expressions no longer just curious, but hostile. This was the moment I had waited for. I moved my pointer to the last part of the board. Finally, let's talk about where all this illegal work is being managed from. I pointed to the map, showing the 4 lots used for the construction staging area. According to the HOA, they own these 4 lots. But according to the county clerk's office as of yesterday afternoon, I dramatically pulled a folded document from my jacket pocket. I unfolded the quitclaim deed, showing my name, freshly stamped and legally recorded. The HOA never finalized the transfer for these lots 30 years ago, so I bought them from the legal owner's heir, which means, for the last 3 months, every truck, every piece of equipment, every worker that has entered this site has been trespassing on my property. The room went completely silent for a second, then exploded. It was absolute chaos. People were on their feet, yelling at Karen, who looked like she'd seen a ghost. She was shuffling papers, her hands trembling, unable to form a coherent sentence. Tom Hensley, the developer, was on his feet now, his face a mask of fury. He wasn't looking at me, he was glaring at Karen. He strode to the front. "What is he talking about?" he hissed at her, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "You told me the land was clear!" Before she could answer, I held up a hand for quiet. "Mr. Hensley," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "According to my copy of your contract with the HOA, you have a clause that protects you if the HOA fails to deliver legally sound, transferable lots." Hensley's eyes widened. He knew exactly what I was talking about. I had just handed him his escape hatch on a silver platter. I had shown him that Karen, his partner, was incompetent, and that the entire project's foundation was built on a lie. Frank stood up from his seat. "I make a motion," he boomed, his firefighter's voice easily carrying over the din, "for a vote of no confidence in the current board president." A chorus of "second" echoed through the room. The public humiliation was complete. Karen's house of cards hadn't just fallen. I had pulled out the table from underneath it. She sat there, speechless, as the community she thought she controlled turned on her, right in front of the man whose money she desperately needed. The room wasn't just on my side anymore. The room was mine. The fallout from the meeting was swift and brutal. Tom Hensley's company formally pulled out of the development agreement the very next day, citing the HOA's failure to provide legally secure land titles. His lawyers used the exact contract clause I had pointed out. Just like that, the funding was gone. The construction site on my hill went silent overnight. The roar of engines was replaced by an eerie quiet, the half-finished frames of houses looking like a modern ghost town. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. She was like a cornered animal. 2 days after the meeting, I found her on my property, near the now-abandoned equipment. She was screaming into her phone, presumably at one of the other board members who had likely abandoned her. When she saw me, her face contorted with pure rage. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "You've ruined everything! This is all my land! I have the paperwork!" She started marching toward my house, still yelling. I didn't say a word. I just stood on my porch with my own phone and dialed the sheriff's office. When the deputy arrived, Karen was still ranting, waving her now useless clipboard. The deputy listened patiently, then turned to me. I calmly presented him with my certified deed and the newly filed quitclaim for the 4 lots she was standing on. I also showed him a copy of the official nullification of the 1974 easement. My paperwork was clean, current, and legally sound. Hers was a fantasy. The deputy looked from my documents to her, his expression weary. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat, "you're trespassing. I need you to leave the property now." She was served with a formal no trespass order right there on the gravel road she'd illegally bulldozed. The ultimate humiliation. A bureaucrat who lived by the rules was finally taken down by them. She tried to spread rumors, of course. She told anyone who would listen that I had forged documents and bribed county officials. But it was too late. Her credibility was shot. The live streams from the meeting had been shared hundreds of times. Everyone had seen my proof board. Everyone had seen her crumble. The HOA board, now in full-blown panic mode, called an emergency session, facing lawsuits from residents for misuse of funds and from the developer for breach of contract. They had no choice. Karen was forced to resign in public disgrace. The motion passed unanimously. The old board was cleaned out, and a new one was elected. Frank, to my surprise, agreed to serve as the interim president. His first act was to formally and publicly recognize my family's original property lines, voiding any and all of the HOA's false claims to my hill. Justice wasn't just a single moment of victory in a crowded room. It was the slow, methodical process of setting things right. It was watching the tow trucks arrive to haul away Hensley's excavators and bulldozers. It was the quiet satisfaction of seeing my "no trespassing" signs, freshly posted on the land I now legally owned, being respected. It was the day the Miller family, whose yard had been threatened by the unsafe retaining wall, came over with a freshly baked apple pie. "Thank you, Mr. Miller said, shaking my hand, his eyes filled with genuine gratitude. "You stood up for all of us." Slowly, the neighborhood started to heal. The fear was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of solidarity. Neighbors started talking to each other again. The weekend barbecues came back. My old friends, who had been scared into silence, sheepishly came around to apologize. I didn't hold any grudges. Fear makes good people do cautious things. We were a community again, made stronger by the crisis we had endured. A month later, on a perfect, sunny Saturday, we had the brunch for Emily's wedding. We set up tables in the garden, and the air was filled with laughter and conversation, not the sound of nail guns and engines. My daughter, looking beautiful and happy, came over and gave me a long hug. "You got your hill back, Dad," she whispered. "No," I said, looking out at the green, scarred but recovering landscape. "We got it back." After the guests left, Emily and her new husband took a small dogwood sapling and planted it at the edge of the meadow, a symbol of a new beginning. We decided to officially rename the hill on our family's private maps. We no longer called it McAllister Hill. We called it Resilience Ridge. The final piece of justice came a few months later, when Frank and the new HOA board finished rewriting the bylaws. They put in new rules ensuring transparency, term limits for board members, and a common-sense process for resolving disputes that didn't involve threats and intimidation. My quiet, patient fight hadn't just saved my land, it had reformed the entire community. Standing on the porch, looking at the slowly healing earth, I felt a deep sense of peace. It wasn't just the pride of winning, it was the calm relief of a job done right. An engineer spends his life building things to last. I hadn't built a bridge or a skyscraper, but I had rebuilt something just as important, a community's faith in fairness. The quiet fury was gone, replaced by the quiet satisfaction that my family's sanctuary was safe and would be for generations to come. The right thing, done the right way, had won.